Okay, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Thursday night. This is Talk About It, Phenomenology Club's audio podcast, and I'm here with my good friend and fellow artist, Andrew Braddock, and we're not monitoring ourselves, so just a note to the chat, if it seems like one of us has drastically different volume, can you be a nice
Just
person
tell
and
us.
please tell us so that we know and can fix that. But welcome, Andy.
Hello.
Hey.
Welcome, Bethany.
Thanks. Me and Andy are getting together tonight because we need to practice, or not practice, but maybe talk a bit about this performance that we'll be doing soon in Brooklyn. What is it, the October 4th?
October 4th, Pro-Tiv 3.
Wait, get closer to the mic, I think.
Pro-Tiv 3, Civil War.
Okay.
At, it's in Alphabet City.
Do you know the name of the venue?
Grace Space.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll post that when we have that. So if
I think it's like 183 Avenue C, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll post it so people can come. It's kind of last year when we did it. This is the third one. We've done 3 altogether. And last year when we did it, it was kind of like a Phenomenology Club performance for myself.
Yeah.
You know, so it's very Phenomenology Club oriented. So you people should come.
And it'll be nice and long. It's going to be, 3 hours. So
3 hours?
I think we're going to try to go for 3 hours.
Come for this performance, endurance, art. Yeah, so I definitely put like a clickbaity picture in here because, you know, some of the people who listen to Phenomenology Club know me through Buttress, so I was hoping to seduce people into coming here by knowing that Andrew is the person who plays Julius Caesar in the Brutus video.
That's right.
But that's because Andrew is an amazing performance artist. Tell us a little bit about what you do, Andy.
I do movement-based performance art. I trained in Buto, which is Japanese dance that came from post-war Japan. This guy, Tatsumi Hijikata, and now there's all these sort of teachers everywhere. So I was doing that in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in Chicago. We lived in Chicago at the same time.
Wait, we did?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Just
but
for a little bit.
In the city.
Through Adam, who will be performing.
Yeah, Adam Rose, who's also in a bunch of my videos.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of improvisation, which I want to talk about a little bit tonight.
Yeah,
Oh, no, sorry, you go.
Well, and then lately I've been improvising. That's been like something that I've been getting excited about. I've been working with a musician for the first time I've ever kind of just done that, where I dance and he plays music, and that's been getting interesting.
With Jake,
that process.
right?
With Jake,
the cellist.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere we can like go check out your work online for anyone listening?
I don't think there's any. There might be like
Andy,
on my
get
YouTube.
a website. What are you
it
doing,
might be
boy?
on my YouTube. But I'm not sure if there's anything up there.
Well, you better get that. If I get some links from Andy, I'll post them. So are we at the same volume check? Can I get feedback?
How do we sound?
I think we are. I'm looking at the levels.
Looks pretty good.
Okay, but I didn't know what I wanted to speak to Andy about because there's so many different things we could speak about. Exactly. Well, actually, someone just mentioned it. Someone said, remember to speak in E prime. And let me tell you what's going on. Okay, so first of all, members of Phenomenology Club know that right now we're in an emergency state of E prime in one of our channels because I'm trying to encourage people to have discussions where they don't insert their own opinions too authoritatively, because I noticed that this is when the conversations kind of like hit a brick wall, you know, like if we're talking about a thing like Buddhism, which we were last night, and I want to talk to you about this tonight. You know, someone starts talking about like, well, suffering is the thing of this, and it's like, well, you can't really contest that opinion because someone's just like now inserting this like statement, this authoritative state. Exactly. Yeah. And for anyone listening that doesn't know what E prime is a language that was introduced to me by our friend Adam Rose. We were just speaking about.
Yep.
And it's relevant to the first Protive performance we did too, because that's when I learned about it, because Adam wanted me to do a song in E prime,
Right.
which I did, which was very difficult, and I don't think I even did it correctly.
Yeah.
But E prime is this language that omits all versions of the verb to be, including the contractions. And actually, I made a chart. Let me pull it up real fast. There's only 8 words that are these verbs. Where'd I put it? People were having a really difficult time.
There we go.
So it's be, am, is, are, was, were, been, being. And then all of the associated contractions. And if you're in a Phenomenology club, you can reference that list. And you should, because, yeah, people are struggling with this. But the purpose of E prime is, like we were just saying, to promote this idea that everything we experience is subjective, you know, but it's not done in an effort to necessarily be more accurate, or like, you know, to like make people paranoid about like, oh, you don't exist or something.
Right.
But I think it's really true that like language, the way we use it, has a big effect on our internalized affects, you know, like we use the example in Phenomenology Club all the time where like if you go out and say in E prime the apple appears red or the apple looks red, people are going to be like, why are you talking like that?
Right.
What's wrong with you? You know, like, should I be wondering if this apple really is red?
Right.
Like, it's kind of crazy to what extent like using words like is this thing, is that, and like speaking so authoritatively about everything we experience is like so deeply integrated into our language that a thing like just using other verbs instead of is and to be becomes like difficult, you know? But we were trying to have a conversation about Buddhism last night and suffering, and we don't really even know much about it. So when you were just telling me about your history, I thought maybe that would be a fun place to start our conversation.
Yeah.
So tell us about where you studied Buddhism and what you were doing, all this.
Yeah. While you were talking about that, though, I was thinking, because the book that I'm reading right now, which is a Buddhist book by this guy that I like, whose name is Chogyam Trungpa. It's Chogyam and he's a Tibetan guy. And when he there are transcriptions of his lectures, and he always says seems instead of is. So he's like telling people kind of like the Dharma or like what he believes to be true, but he's never saying like your ego is this or experience is like this. He's always saying, well, it seems to be this way. Even though you're like, come on, like, you know how it is, like, you're seeing it, but he always uses that language, and I think it's...
Is that unique to him, or is this like a thing you see often in other Buddhist thinkers as well?
Well, I think this is the only book I've ever read that was like transcriptions of lectures.
Oh, okay.
And it's kind of interesting to think that like being so certain and saying like this is a book, it's like projecting more certainty than you have. Right. And it's like this way to like almost make yourself feel secure. Like he talks about, someone asked him at one point, they're like, why do you always say seems? And he's talking about how like that kind of certainty and like using language about things existing is like is like a way of reassuring yourself and like solidifying yourself and like trying to have an ego, like maintain an ego.
Yeah. So and it sounds like so arbitrary, I think. Like, I think if I had heard this a few years ago, I'd be like, come on, like, you sound like a douchebag, you know? But I think that it's true that when you like give yourself this confidence that's unmerited, like it really does change your worldview, you know, and it's in a way that I think can be even harmful to yourself, you know. I think that it's very true that you become more open-minded even when you use language like this, you know, because
Yeah.
you start to see like more variable possibilities. And
Yeah.
this is very relevant to like phenomenology, especially because Husserl, and you're a big
Right.
philosophy guy,
Yeah,
but like
and I
with
love-
his
yeah.
epoche, like the whole, I mean, epoche literally means suspension of judgment, and like
Right.
all of phenomenology is structured around trying to find ways to step away to the best of our ability
Yeah.
from what we think we know about the world, with the hope that, you know, other possibilities will show themselves to us.
Right.
And this is part of a conscious process. So I think a thing like changing your language actually
Yeah.
like really is a helpful tool for trying to see things differently, you
Yeah.
know?
Because I feel like the phenomenology thing is kind of like what you're saying, where it's like listening rather than like thinking or something, or like you're trying to like like you said, suspend so that you can just perceive, have like a clearer way to perceive what's going on that's not
Right.
clouded by like discursive thought or something.
Right.
So it's like listening versus like, I don't know, like categorizing or nailing down or
Yeah.
something in language.
And
Like,
it's with the purpose of being able to think better and
Yeah,
make better
yeah.
categories, you know?
and just explore
right.
what's going on, being kind of like, it's like leaving open the question instead of saying like what the fuck is going on and then giving it your best guess. You're like leaving that question open, and it's just like a exploration or
and
something.
in that way,
instead.
like it sounds like it's some like hippy dippy bullshit, but
Yeah.
I think it's, and Husserl thought this as well, and this is why he made phenomenology. You know, the entire purpose is actually to be more analytical. You know,
Yeah.
because it more resembles like a natural science perspective,
Right.
you know, which is very self-critical, and like all scientific hypotheses are always being tested, you know,
Right.
like everything is possible at all times. I feel like, you know, there's definitely like a trope that scientists are a bunch of like know-it-alls and like whatever, but I think that some of the most open-minded people I've ever been I've ever experienced.
You added the extra bin in there because we're talking about each time.
I just
the
feel like
bin
that
came
word
out.
didn't work right there. I don't
Yeah.
know what I was saying. But yeah, some of the most open-minded people I've ever met were natural scientists. And I think it's because of this. Like, they take on a kind of mode that I think is sort of phenomenological. Like, they want to find the best way to meaningfully categorize things, you know? So I think that to do this, you have to try your best to be open to all possibilities, even the most ridiculous ones, you know, because from that premise of being more open-minded, then you can find the best way to categorize information, which we're definitely going to do no matter what, you know?
Because it allows you to like really look, you're like looking at the thing and being like, what is this? And I was thinking today about like listening, and the way that like listening is kind of like you're allowing yourself to be affected by anything, and even things that you maybe don't understand yet, or like that you think they're like threatening or bullshit or whatever, like just like allowing yourself to be affected by them, and you know, without like, because you limit your own experience like so much to be able to do stuff, you know, like go about your day or whatever. There's like so many things that limit your ability to perceive. And so like listening in a way where you're like sitting back and having like a panoramic, you're just like letting whatever come in is like, I feel like that's kind of like a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's definitely true. I mean, being active and actively thinking about something versus being passive is definitely, I think, a much different cognitive experience. At least it feels that way.
Yeah.
But who fucking knows?
Right. Yeah. That's what it feels
dude?
like when I do it.
Yeah, but I think Husserl felt this way too.
Yeah.
Like, not to make it all about fucking Husserl, but
Well, I think
that's why he made that's why all of it, phenomenology is structured around this idea of intentionality, you know?
Yeah.
Because he felt that was the most fundamental property of consciousness.
And that's like where you can, like, if you say that your whole consciousness or something is like a field, intention is like where you can move around in that field and like direct yourself into different things. Is that what that idea is? Or
What, Husserl's idea about intentionality? Yeah, well, he felt very strongly that consciousness is at all times reaching out. It's at all times being responsive to our environment. But it seems like consciousness has this very distinct emergent property of intentionality. Like right now I can listen to you and you can listen to what I'm saying, but if you want, you can choose to tune me out entirely and listen to the fan behind me. You know, like your consciousness almost seems like a radar. You can move it around and like scan it, and then you also wonder like, well, it's crazy, like, if you were to tune me out, and listen to the fan, but then you decided you wanted to pretend you were listening to what I'm saying, you can almost, like, play it back in your head like that fucking echo.
Yeah.
Like, consciousness clearly has so many, like, hard-to-describe properties.
Movements and actions and behaviors and stuff.
Yeah. And, like, even when we're sleeping, our body is at all times listening. Like, if someone makes a sound, it comes in at night to fucking murder me, my body is going to be like, bitch, no.
And I clench my jaw in my sleep. You're doing so much stuff.
Yeah, but we're at all times conscious.
But I think that's why I like some of the Buddhist books that I've been reading recently. This guy in particular, just because that's what I'm reading. But it feels like he's doing that same phenomenological process where it's just like in meditation, you're just examining your consciousness, and his thing is about not contradicting and like being able to let more and more in, because I think there's different schools of Buddhist thought, like Theravada Buddhism, which is like an earlier kind. You do a certain kind of Vipassana meditation where you're told you start focusing on your breath, and there's like a whole codified like trajectory that you go on. So you do your breath, and then you can like pay attention to like your upper lip and then like your nostril. So they add it in until you're like doing your full body, and then you can do thoughts, and there's like a whole thing to it.
And what's the purpose? Like, what's the goal of it?
Well, I think that...
Wait, can you talk more in the microphone? I'm just worried it might not be clear. Hold on.
I'm moving my head around a lot.
I'll move your...
Yeah.
All right, go
so,
ahead.
What's the point? You're like training your mind. You're training your... It's like kind of like a hardcore like training thing where you're trying to develop like a habit of being able to like focus and develop these like stages of concentration and consciousness where you're not just at the mercy of your thoughts all the time, and you're not just like, everything is kind of like a little bit like slower, and you have the capacity to like let things go and like just sort of, but it's more, I feel like that thread is more like training based, like you sit and you put in the practice, and like, and the kind of stuff I think that this guy's talking about is more about like letting your mind, just like observing your mind and seeing your own behavior and like seeing the way it moves, and like ultimately like eliminating that whole like, but not telling you to do anything in particular in your head. Like you're not trying to like focus on your breath or anything like that. It's just more about like being with yourself in a certain way, and the descriptions feel like phenomenological descriptions.
Totally.
Where it's just like giving you good images for what happens.
It's
like,
helping you kind of create a map of yourself.
Yeah.
Which I think, phenomenology is definitely very interested into. But can I ask you, because like this is my personal feeling about Buddhism and like all schools of spirituality, and like I did a video about this as well, because like everything we're saying, I'm like, okay, like phenomenology is like the same thing, like why do you think Buddhism presents an argument for why it needs to exist in like this more esoteric mode? Like, do you think these things that we're talking about can be achieved in just like a sort of secular school of practice, because that's how I feel like a thing like Buddhism, which seems fine, well, maybe, I don't know, I have some criticisms I want to ask you about too, But I think, yeah, like if we could achieve this with more neutral language,
Yeah.
and neutrality seems to be a thing both schools of thinking like
Yeah.
value, why wouldn't we go with the one that's more neutral,
Yeah.
so to speak?
Well, this guy, Trunk that I keep talking about, he actually like he was, his story is that he was sort of like born into a karma to bring Tibetan Buddhism to the United States, because it was like
What's a karma? A
karma.
purpose?
It's sort of like a thread, you know, like your karma is kind of like the space that you occupy in the space-time continuum or something. So you're kind of born into a situation. So like the situation you're born into is a part of your karma.
So is it
but then
predetermined?
well, you're just born into whatever. I don't think all Buddhist people believe in like determinism. Like determinism isn't as much of a thing. Is that what you mean? Like
No, I mean predetermined, like
well, there's no
your
you.
future is set for you, basically. Whatever's going to happen to you is already dictated
I think
by
that
some external
some people
force.
probably believe that.
Okay.
But I think the idea, I mean, because the whole idea of like one description of nirvana or like enlightenment is like basically like throwing off your karma, like not being involved in this like chain
so
reaction
you can wander
thing.
away from your karma.
It's like, yeah, in the same way that you're born into you're just dropped into your consciousness when you're born, and you have to start trying to like make sense of the world before you even know anything about it, and like you have, you know, your family or not or whatever, but that you put all these things in place. So I feel like a lot of Buddhist images, they can be like, you can take them like universally, or they can also be over the course of a lifetime, or they can be over the course of a day or something, you know, they like expand like that. But so that could be kind of like your karma too, is like all the shit you put in place in your mind that you're essentially ruled by until you become aware of it. And you spend, I feel like I've spent a lot of my adult life like trying to just understand all the like fear that I have, or like all the my own psychology, and then like recognizing things, and either like maybe I don't like use them that much anymore because they like make me anxious or something, or then other ones I get excited about that I discover. But so that's kind of like, that could be like karma too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, to go back to this question of secularism versus,
Well, he
like,
tried to
Buddhism.
start, he was like, Americans are too weirdly obsessed with Buddhism. This is a problem. And so he tried to start a different thing that was called Shambhala, that was just supposed to be like a secular. And he wrote a book and published it because he was like, this is not, like, the whole thing is like, this is not a big deal. It's nothing special. Like, it's not Buddhism. It's just trying to like be practical and like live with yourself and like be more sane.
And did he do this with the purpose of encouraging people to not take such like a literalist approach to Buddhism or something? Because it kind of seems, just when you're talking about like karma,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I know you. I don't know if you take like a literalist approach to everything you're saying, but it kind of seems like a useful thought model, whether
Yeah.
or not you take it literally.
Yeah.
So I understand there's like a utility there, but like, do you find that any of that is like necessary, or not even just necessary, but like, does it change the process? Like, if I were to try to think about all the things we're talking about simply from like a secular phenomenological viewpoint, you know, do you feel like these experiences will be completely different? Like, what's fundamentally different about like taking on a more spiritualist approach? Because Buddhism is associated, you know, with like spirituality and
yeah. I think you could potentially, I mean, another thing that is kind of interesting to me about the idea of karma would be the status that like our experience is really different potentially, like, and so I don't know whether like you would come to similar experiences, or not, but it seems like you do. Like I think that a lot of the descriptions that come out of that match ways that Buddhists have of describing it.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it was nice to have, because I'm like I went through a whole Christian thing that I eventually felt completely alienated from. And so I think it was nice for me personally it was like, okay, Buddhism, like, this is like another thing that's like, maybe I could, it was like more approachable to me for some reason because I was already had all these habits around like being religious.
Yeah.
But I think that some people could, like, I feel like I know people who just come to things through having like a curious attitude in life. It's like,
well, I think that's
you don't
like
need
my
it, but
frustration with Buddhism because I'm like, you see especially a lot of like people who call themselves skeptics and rational thinkers get into Buddhism too. And I'm like, why everything that seems really intriguing or useful about Buddhism, things like meditation and shit, I mean, not that that's implicitly Buddhist, but like these are all things I'm like, why can't we just do this from some sort of secular lens, but
and that's the guy like, he thought that was a really big problem, that like, because Americans, I think he felt that Americans were really competitive, and like just the mindset where your religious practice becomes your ego and you're still trying to achieve, but through like a Buddhist path as opposed to like a Wall Street path or something, but that you take the same fucked mentality toward spiritual practice where you're like, it's like self-hatred and like all this shit.
But isn't Buddhism very much about self-hatred?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's he like, oh, well, no, I don't think it's about self-hatred.
Let's talk about
It's not about self-hatred.
Can you explain to us how Buddhism, what's the relationship with the ego and the self? Let's talk. How is ego defined, first of all?
It's pretty different. It can be pretty different depending on like the schools of Buddhism. Mm-hmm. So I'll just talk about the thing that I've been reading that I kind of also feel more familiar with.
Okay.
But it's like the three major kind of like threads would be Theravada, which is like kind of like they call it the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, and they also call it the lesser vehicle, which is seems kind of fucked up to me, but it's like older Buddhism sort of, and then Mahayana Buddhism, which is like Zen, and that was like the start of these ideas that like you're already enlightened, and ideas about compassion and bringing the world back into it, because the early Buddhism in a way was like could be seen, I think, as a kind of like escapism where you're trying to escape the world. And so with Mahayana, it was more about being like, no, nirvana isn't somewhere else. It's the same as samsara. And then Vajrayana Buddhism is Tibetan Buddhism. And that's when it traveled through, from India to China, this guy Bodhidharma. And then it came to Tibet, and they already had like a local religion. I think that was called Bon. And it sort of like combined to be like the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. Okay. And that's Tibetan, and that's Vajrayana, and that's like, that becomes like more really about like embracing everyday things, and like there's like a famous so, and that's where this guy Trungpa is from. He's Tibetan.
And what's
I think
the ego?
He would say the ego, I think, is like, the microphone. Okay, it's like it's in my face.
Be up in it. Be up in the microphone. I'm gonna turn it down a little.
Okay.
Go ahead. Talk into the mic, please.
There's some water here. But
I'm just
so
worried
I think
we won't
he
be able to hear it.
Would say that your ego is kind of like this cluster of like behaviors and thoughts and emotions that you sort of construct in order to stabilize in a world that is impermanent and that is scary to you on some level, and so you do all these things to sort of like solidify something for yourself, and you call that yourself, but it's a sort of like a false idea of separateness.
So the thing that they're trying to, I guess, transcend in a sense of the ego is not necessarily the idea that you exist as a singular unit.
Right.
It's the idea that you are implicitly removed from everything around you.
Yeah, well, I think it's more that, because in the Tibetan it's very practical. Like they don't deny. I think it's like a problem that you can get too lofty with these things. Like they don't deny like that there's like a earthy, it's about energy, and like that there's like a earthy quality to things, and that like objects, you're like with objects, you're in a world and stuff like that. But so I think it's more about being like all of this, that you're just a part of the world, and I think that's the main point. Not that there's like, not that you don't exist, but I think for one, definitely that categories don't exist. That's like the big like emptiness thing, is that like all of thought, or so much of thought, is just about creating these categories and solidifying these categories that don't exist, and that you could potentially spend your whole life inside of that. And so that's one thing that I guess maybe could be seen. But even that, it's like, it's not that doesn't exist, because it's also sort of like a false idea to try to like deny that you have thoughts like that or something like that. It's a way of like, kind of like non-attachment, I think, is the main thing, where you're not attached to any certain thing. And like in this, I think the attitude is kind of like a little bit like the listening thing, the phenomenological listening thing, where you're really like just available in a certain way. And they talk about openness a lot, and being
you're not pitting yourself as the enemy. You're not being anti-self. You're trying to use what you know, or what you think you know about the world, to you come to the conclusion that there's so many trappings you can fall into, like we were saying, things that show themselves through like language and this overuse of the word is and stuff. So you're born into a world where so much has already been structured for you, and meaning assigned to everything. So since you are the vehicle as yourself for making meaning out of these things, or choosing to adhere to these value systems, it makes sense then that Buddhism becomes almost like, it becomes introspective with the purpose of having more meaningful perspective on the world. Would you say that?
And like I think that part of the idea is that like even the construction of your ego is not, it's kind of amazing, and it's like an instinctual thing, and that it's not a thing to like hate yourself for doing. It was like the best idea you had at that time, or like it was like you just started working with what you had, and you start constructing this thing, and you're just like literally just like doing your best at every moment or something like that. So I think there is something there too about how you have to like embrace that, or like embrace your own intelligence in that way, to be like, actually like this whole thing is complicated now, but it was like pretty it like,
and the entire purpose is self-betterment at the end of the day. So but someone just said in the chat, and this is something I wanted to ask you about as well, we were talking about it last night in Phenomenology Club. This is their full comment. They said Buddhism promotes non-attachment as a means to minimize suffering. And I wanted to ask you about Buddhism's relationship to suffering, now that you've talked about the ego a bit, because that was something I've always like felt wary of, like Buddhism's explanation of the ego. And yeah, I feel like I understand. I have a less negative
Yeah.
viewpoint now. Like that, talking about it like that, I think, yeah, that sounds better than what I've come to understand
Yeah.
about Buddhism. But what is their relationship like with suffering? Because it does seem to be a big part of Buddhist theory.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the idea is just that everybody suffers, and that to a greater or lesser degree you can find yourself in a place where you feel really confused, and whatever your style of that is, like anxiety or depression, or like you can get into these places where you really are suffering, like you just experience, like it doesn't feel good to be alive, or like you feel confused about that, or like, and that's like a certain brand of it, I guess, that I think about. But there's also just like bodily suffering and all those things that like,
Yeah, someone was telling us last night how they have different kinds of suffering.
Yeah.
It's like physical,
Death.
emotional, social.
And I think the ultimate thing is death, in a way that like suffering, because suffering is also, I don't even know, it's probably a translation of a Sanskrit word, and I don't even know if that's like, there's probably a deeper meaning to, I think it's dukkha.
Oh yeah, the one person that
Yeah.
said that suffering can also be understood as general dissatisfaction or
Yeah.
discontentment, not necessarily suffering.
But I think it's also death too, in that like there's so much about like being able to like recognize your own death, and that I think that would be like another spin on like what suffering is. Just the fact that if you develop an ego, you are going to experience alienation, and that feels bad or something.
So suffering also comes by way of falling into the trappings of the ego.
Exactly. But that it's not like but again, you're like born into it. And you're born into a karma or something.
But it is pretty like central to the ideology, right? It seems like, or do you think that might just be like a Western perspective on Buddhism? Because I feel like every time I see stuff about Buddhism, it's very much about suffering. And what's up with those guys that like pull shit with their balls and their dicks? And like, I've seen Buddhists like drill holes in their heads with like fucking, like, what is this about?
I saw a guy, he was a Hindu. People I know that do that are like, I think they're called...
You know people that do this?
No, I don't know anyone, but like the group of people are like the sadhus, like the Hindu holy people. Yeah. And I saw a guy who buried himself up to his neck for 7 days.
Holy shit.
We watched them put him in the ground, and he was in like a full body cast. And he just stood in a cast, buried up to his neck for 7 days. And they made there was like an altar around him, and you could go up and look at him. And you would like approach him, and he would just look you like, it was like this head on the ground that was
looking. He's like the Indian David Blaine.
Right in the eye, like, and you could go like, you could give him like offerings and stuff. But I think that maybe something that happened, suffering is like the first noble truth.
What are the noble truths?
The fundamental, I don't even know if I can remember them all. It's like the suffering, the cause of suffering. One of them's like nirvana, and one of them's the path. But that was like the first, I don't know if it was like the first, it was like a really fundamental Buddhist text. And so I think that probably there's something where that was also the first stuff that made its way into like American scholarship or something. So there is probably something where like everybody who studied Buddhism in the United States has read that first as like the fundamental idea of Buddhism. But I think that they all deal with suffering a little different. And I was going to say that I think with that, I went to a Zen retreat one time, and the guy, one of the things that he said to us was that you shouldn't treat meditation like therapy. You shouldn't like approach meditation being like, I'm going to feel better, and this is my like way to feel better. And he was specifically making the point that even that like intention or desire clouds your ability to see what you're doing, and that's a certain kind of like ego game in itself, that you're like trying to make yourself better or something, that's a way of struggling with yourself, and it gets in the way of even seeing. So that's an example of just like the focus not necessarily being on suffering, but that on some level is what draws you toward trying to sort this stuff out in the first place. Like some experience of like
suffering
something.
is the impetus for even desiring a thing like Buddhism.
There you go.
Yeah. Do you feel... Okay, sorry, I'm checking our levels.
Yeah.
How's our levels?
I'm moving my head around a lot.
Yeah, Andy can't speak directly into
All right,
microphones.
I'm gonna try it.
That's the
I'm
first
gonna
rule
try
of
to do
Buddhism.
I'm gonna try to do better. It's my Buddhist
Well,
practice
it's okay.
right now.
I'm trying to ride
My
these
Buddhist
levels.
practice is gonna be speaking into the microphone.
I don't know. Someone in the chat, please. Are we at the same level?
Are we at the same level? It looks like it.
I think. I don't know. Who fucking knows? Whatever. It doesn't matter. What was I saying? Yeah, do you feel like, okay, like that example you just gave, that's really interesting. Like, don't approach anything, with like a purpose, because even the thought of having a purpose for doing a thing is going to guide your thought trajectories in a way that could be harmful.
Yeah.
But do you think that same idea can be applied to like maybe the structuring of Buddhism itself? Like, because I was talking about this with someone last night. Like, do you even like framing any ideology around a thing like, whatever you make central to your ideology, I think is going to transform the ideology itself. So like, and I'm not sure if this is an accurate representation, like we were saying, but if you make like suffering the central focus of like your spirituality or something, or like whatever, like you
become obsessed with suffering.
Or like avoiding it, or like who's even to say that suffering is a thing to be avoided? But it seems like that could be a popular Buddhist attitude too. Like, you don't need to necessarily like respond to or engage with suffering. Like, maybe just let it fucking happen.
And that you might not even know what's suffering, like you don't even maybe know how you're suffering, or like what suffering is, that you might have like a whole idea about suffering that's actually comforting to you, that you're using all the time to like self-comfort.
Oh my God, it's so deep. So your ideas about suffering
could be
are
a security blanket.
Oh my God. But then you could say like you're still suffering because like you're deluding yourself into falsities.
About suffering.
No, it could go on forever. What about buttress is a little louder. That's because my frequencies are so fucking high, like a knife. Thank you though. Okay. You cannot act without thinking of yourself. Everything is driven by survival of self, somebody says. Well, actually, I was just going to ask you about this, as I think it's relevant. We could bring it all back, just like we almost just did, because everything's connected. Talking about things like being, states of being, you know, and the self, like, this is a thing I think that's very relevant to phenomenology, Buddhism, and like E-Prime, which you're talking about, Does Buddhism like speak much on the nature of being? Like, what is being? Someone last night asked in the chat, what does be mean? Or no, what does is mean as a word? And is a form of to be. But what is being, Like, does Buddhism speak much from what you've seen about what is it?
Well, I think that's like the question that they think is misguided or something. That like trying to figure out what it is essentially trying to define something, and that's really what
what the fuck?
So they just want to get out of that or something.
I could see that. Well, let's go back to an earlier thing too. Maybe we'll see where the conversation takes us, if we can make allusions back to. We're at 45 minutes, too, so we should only go for, like, 15 more minutes max. So let's end on this. I was thinking about improvisation, because that's a thing we both do. You have much more experience with it. And I think that ideas about being, especially, are really interesting in the realm of thinking about improvisation, because you know the act of doing improvisation is so like always in the moment,
Yeah.
and you, when you're in this moment, have to try your best to like be considerate of like the beginning of your improvisational performance,
Right.
where it's going to go. It's like all about like being suspended in time, you know, like
Right.
what. And you're someone who's really like studied improvisation, like you've committed yourself to the practice.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, can you tell us maybe like what do you feel are things you've learned as you've gone on doing improvisation? Like were there times in your practice where like you felt like you had a breakthrough? Like what
Yeah.
ideas are central to you about improving?
Well, like I said, I feel like I have learned a lot in the last year with this guy Jake, who plays the cello and he makes electronic music, and he can kind of do both of those live. But that was like I when I was doing that, I was feeling like I actually, you know, it's a feeling where I'm like, I've never improvised before. Actually, now I'm
What?
really doing it. But just that, I think it was a switch from, I think a lot of trying to improvise for me for a long time was just trying to be present and like you know, trying to be just like in the moment and like able to like follow a thread or something, and to stay engaged with it. But then I think because our rehearsals were super laid back, we would have like dinner sometimes and just like, and I think I started to do improvisation more like that felt like, okay, I don't have maybe as hard of a time. I think just because I was doing it more often, I don't have as hard of a time being present. So now that I'm present, like, what am I doing? Or like, what can I do? Mm-hmm. And for me, that's a lot of just like feeling like mechanics of my body or like sensations or things like that, and like following those and like finding new ways to. I think what I do and when I'm working with Jake is like it feels like opening up a new dimension in my body and then figuring out what it is and like how I can use it or work with it. And it's nice to do that with music because you have something to respond to. Mm-hmm. So even if I start to get like lost, I can anchor it back into music. And so I guess it now, in a way that I really like, it feels more exploratory or something, as opposed to like I think it was really stressful for me previously or something.
Improvising is super stressful.
Yeah.
Like when we were just talking about it, when we did the first proto, I was fucking terrified.
I was super stressed. There in that video, you can see I like hide for a little while,
Really?
like because there's so much fog from the fog machine. But there's a part where like I clearly don't really know what to do, and I kind of just like crouch in the back for like a while because it's like.
It's
Yeah.
terrifying. Like,
Yeah.
and even I had some experience performing live, like doing music, which, like we're saying, it was so much easier because there's ultimately sort of a script. Like, you know, I just do this song and I leave. But having to improv is very difficult. And I think, too, the most difficult thing about it for myself, something I really want to do, and something I really admire in Adam in particular, because
totally.
I think he's really great at this.
Amazing.
But the way that he can like hold the gaze of the audience, that's the thing that fucks me up.
Yeah.
Every time I make eye contact with someone new, and I'm not speaking about like musical performance, because I feel like I'm okay at like looking at people when I'm performing, but do like improving like during proto and stuff, that's difficult. Like I want to like get in people's faces and be weird and shit, but I swear every time I hold the gaze of someone in the audience, it's a new feeling, and it's like you feel conscious
panicky.
of them perceiving you, and it is. It's like as soon as it happens, it's like, oh shit, what do I do?
Exactly.
And you're already in the like, oh shit, what do I do mode when you're improving. So then to like every time you make eye contact with someone in the crowd, you got a little, oh shit, like. And then you lose it, and I'm like, no.
And then you're like, damn. And then you go hide behind the fog machine for like 20 minutes.
Go roll around naked for a bit in the corner. This is my routine while I think about what's gonna happen next.
But that's been kind of nice with the the last one that we did, and then the one in Chicago where we have like 2.5 hours or 3 hours, I think that's been easier to like, because part of it is being able to be calm. I think like being able to explore something, it takes some level of being calm with yourself. So like, I mean, it's the same for me, even, I mean, it's in a performance, but also sometimes in conversation and stuff, like making eye contact is really intense and like hard to, you know, it makes you uncomfortable or something. So like being able to be comfortable in that, it's a little easier when it's 3 hours because you don't have to, sometimes you can't do something for 3 hours straight. So you can just sort of like listen for a little bit or like whatever.
Yeah.
So I think
better
doing
not be
longer
a solo
stuff,
performance.
Yeah.
That would be hard as hell. 3 hour solo performance.
Yeah, just one person.
Oh god, that's some endurance piece bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh shit, I was just gonna say something.
Listening is the big part of improvising, I think, or that's like what I'm excited about, or one thing I'm excited about with improvising is that you're trying to listen to what is actually happening, and, or whatever. You're just trying to listen to what's going on and listen to like yourself, and yeah, and that's cool. Like I think that the piece that we were sort of doing, that we maybe performed 3 or 4 times, it really did feel like, because we would use projectors too, so there would be like a wall with like projector feedback, and then Jake was playing a lot of like drones that had a lot of feedback tones in them, and other stuff. He did a lot of different things actually, and then so I felt like my role in the improvisation was just to like move my awareness around and all those things. And so sometimes I would be paying a little bit of attention to the projections and like having that affect like my internal sense, or like moving more with the music and like just kind of putting myself in relation to all the different elements in a way of just sort of like the way you roam around your own consciousness, kind of.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's probably easy to see, like, how a thing like Buddhism or phenomenology, whatever, like, both of these things and just this general, making any sort of general commitment to trying to understand yourself and how you react in your immediate, like, perceptual response to things can totally, like, help your artistic practice in really crazy ways. Like,
totally.
Whether it's improv or even, you know, a thing that you sit and make at home, like working on music or whatever, I feel like all of these ideas are so relevant. And also just, like, general senses of well-being, like we've been talking about tonight. Like, I feel like, and we were just talking about it now with the performance, like, anxiety. I'm really intrigued.
Fear.
Yeah, I really like this idea. I like what you said, that one guy said, because this is how I personally have battled my own anxiety. I just let it happen. And, once I finally, I think it came about by, like, becoming exhausted by it.
Where you can't, you can't, like,
body,
push it away anymore.
Yeah,
you
my
just,
body
like,
is so tired of being this shook little bitch
that
I was just like, fuck it, I'm anxious.
Yeah,
like,
I'm anxious all the time. Like, I'm fucking anxious all the time.
This person is going to see me shaking like a fucking leaf. I'm just going to do it, and then I'm going to walk away, and my life will be fine.
Whatever.
And even now it still happens. Like, I'll get super high and go to Rite Aid. There's something wrong with me. Like, I can't stand in lines. Do you get this? When I stand in line waiting to check out, all of a sudden panic hits me.
It gets freaky.
Yeah, like if there's a line and I have to start waiting, I'll shake. Like by the time I get to the front, I'm like shaking just to pay with a debit card. Yeah. But then, like, I seriously, like, I'll be, like, seriously shaking. Like, the person probably thinks I have MS or something. And then as soon as I'm out of Rite Aid, I'm fine. Like, I feel great. But now I just laugh at it. I'm like, dude, that person probably thought I was going to shoot up Rite Aid or something.
Yeah.
Like, it's hilarious. Like, I can't fight this. I'm pretty sure anxiety, too, is, like, a pretty natural response. It's like, just fucking let it rip. It'll go away. Like,
and then you realize, like, how, I mean, if it is insignificant, you realize, once you, like, let it out, you're like, oh, I'm just like shaking it Rite Aid, like it's not a big deal.
Exactly, because it seems natural. Because for a long time I felt like, oh, I'm gonna find the way to get rid of it, and I really don't think there is a way.
No,
like, I'm a pretty
things,
social person. Like, I can get up in front of people and like perform like pretty easily, but I'm still gonna have like a random panic attack in Rite Aid. Like, I think I just have to accept that. It's like, who cares? It's funny. Like, it's not a big deal. Just fucking let it go, dude.
Yeah.
Accept that. Everything is nothing. I like being.
But it's,
like,
yeah.
stop. I
That's
love
true
it.
though. Like even with like if you're working on stuff alone, like I noticed one time I was in the dance studio and I was doing something and I was like, that's dumb. That looks stupid. Like what do you? And then I was like, what am I doing? I'm in this room all alone, and I'm like telling myself I can't do certain things because they don't look good or something. You know, where it's like that's like I have the same fear like with myself. You know, and those things get in the way of being like I can just.
Yeah.
You know,
it doesn't
pursuing
fucking
it.
matter.
Yeah.
I know. Sometimes I wonder if it's a trap because this is something I feel like I've taken with myself in general, being critical of myself. Like I am critical of myself,
Policing
but
yourself.
in general, like, you know, when like feelings of like I'm not doing enough, I'm not doing this enough, blah blah blah. I'm just kind of like whatever. I don't care. Like I'm always going to find something wrong I'm doing. I just don't even listen to myself, criticize myself. Which sometimes I'm like, maybe I should listen a little bit, but I just like can't. And I'm like, man, fuck you, shut up.
Yeah, because else you gotta just keep going. Keep working.
Yeah, it's like, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna try.
What am I gonna do? Sit around and like try to please you all day long?
I mean, I am myself. I'm the other voice too. So I obviously feel this way. So I obviously am doing something about it because I'm reprimanding myself in my head.
I'm out here reprimanding myself. I'm all alone in my room.
So I'm already
like,
on it.
On
clearly.
my ass. Yeah, I'm on my own ass.
Even if I don't listen to that voice telling me in that moment, that's still my
that's
voice
stupid.
too. Yeah, so we're good.
Yeah.
We're fine.
Yeah, it's all me.
Exactly. All right, so we're coming up on an hour.
Okay.
I think that's a good place to wrap this up. Again, we're performing October 4th in is it Brooklyn?
Yeah. No, it's in Manhattan. It's in Alphabet
Manhattan.
City. Yeah.
Ooh. Come on out if you're in the area and see me and Andy and Adam Rose and others. Antibody, Protiv,
Civil War.
Yeah. What's the venue? Grace something?
It's either called Gray Space or like 183 Avenue C or something like that.
Okay. I'll post about it on my Twitter accounts.
Yeah.
That's probably the best place to find it. And Andy doesn't have a website.
But I do have some of the videos up somewhere, so
we'll send them to me, and I'll put them in the description.
I can probably find them.
Thanks for speaking with us. Now me and Andy are going to go get weird and improv and have a great fucking time. So we'll see you guys later.
Bye.